Today, I had a conversation with my friend Howard Bloom. He is an author, a scientist, a philosopher, an entrepreneur. He's been on Joe Rogan. He's been on Coast to Coast radio tons of times, done television appearances, making a documentary about him, all kinds of stuff. He's a big name. And he's written all these books you see below me: The Lucifer Principle, The Global Brain, The Genius of the Beast, The God Problem, The Muhammad Code, and How I Accidentally Started the 60s is his newest book. And we sat down and had a conversation. I tried to make the conversation as much about the 2020 election as possible, but when you're talking to Howard Bloom, he's very hard to keep on any one topic. I did the best job I could. For those of you who might remember, I've talked to him in the past. I tried to be a little bit more active in the conversation this time. It's really easy to let him kind of like soliloquize. So I tried to interject a lot more, keep him on his toes. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Check it out. Howard, it's been too long. How long has it been? I don't even know. It's been years.
Oh, it's been 4 years or something like that.
Yeah, it's been a crazy long amount of time, way too long.
Right. Right. And it must be said that TJ gave me my start on YouTube and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I was very fascinated from a young age. I just happened upon your book, and I don't know if you know this about me, but I have a pretty bad attention deficit disorder. So I don't get through many books. I start a lot of them. I don't really finish a lot of them.
Right.
That one I read. I'm not going to say I sat there and read it all in one sitting because I didn't, but it kept me coming back. It kept me engaged throughout, and I probably read it in 3 or 4 sessions. And
That's amazing.
it had a big impact on the way I thought about the world. A lot of the stuff that was already in my head was really crystallized by it. Then it got to, I went and, of course, read the follow-up, The Global Brain, which I thought was also brilliant and awesome. And your most recent book, I haven't read it, but How I Started this, Accidentally Started the 60s, is that how it goes?
How I actually started the 60s. By the way, the first book that TJ is referring to is The Lucifer Principle, a scientific expedition into the forces of history.
Yes.
And the new one is How I Accidentally Started the 60s, and Timothy Leary said it's a monumental masterpiece of American literature and filled with nonstop rollicking scientific comedy routines and wah-woo and aha experiences. And he compared it to James Joyce, which is weird because I don't understand a word of James Joyce. So I hope he understood a word of my book. So it's the book has gotten some very good response. How I Accidentally Started the 60s.
Yeah,
The story of how I accidentally helped start the hippie movement in the early 1960s before anybody realized it was the 60s yet.
Do you regret it? Do you regret accidentally starting the 60s or?
No, it was fabulous. I mean, it was an era of adventure, and it was an era of going to the very extremes of human experience in order to figure out what we could figure out about who we were and what we were up to and what we should be up to. And it was a wild, weird, wacky, crazy, and extremely rich time in terms of bringing back the bacon of knowledge and whole new ways of doing things.
Cool. Well, I feel like we're still living in interesting times. I don't know if you can really analogize these times.
Still living in interesting time. These are some of the most interesting times for the worst that we've ever been through in America. I mean, not since Warren G. Harding have we had such an absurd White House situation, and the politics are getting positively peculiar.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I brought you on to talk about was our current political state of affairs. Because you're many things. You're a philosopher, you're a scientist, you're an entrepreneur, but you're also a political junkie. With huge emphasis, I think, on foreign policy stuff. You're very fascinated with the geopolitical workings of the world and things of that nature. But we're going to kind of be focused more on domestic stuff today. And I wanted to talk to you really about this divide in the Democratic Party because to me, I'm a young whippersnapper compared to yourself. You are
75 years
75
old,
years old. I am 30
doing 800 pseudo push-ups a
pseudo
day.
push-ups.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and yeah, you well, let's get into that really briefly cuz back in the day you always used to be like I did this many push-ups, I did this many push-ups, but I guess you found out recently that what you were doing was actually not technically a push-up.
Right.
Um,
Well, they're doing this film on me. It's a 70-minute documentary called Surf the Catastrophe, and it's about 99% finished. The director has won 3 Emmys.
cool.
His name is Charlie Hoxie. And they came in early in the morning so they could shoot me getting out of bed and doing my push-ups. And after a while, they stopped shooting the push-ups when they came in early in the morning to shoot me taking my zillions of pills a day and stuff like that. And I wondered why. And then Charlie called up one day and said, "Well, we have to tell you this. It's not really push-ups." So I have this gorgeous Asian house guest, and I had the gorgeous Asian house guest perch on the floor with her cell phone, shooting me while I did my push-ups. And now, okay, now here's one of the most amazing discoveries of all time. I discovered that my body, without ever telling me, had invented an entirely new form of push-up. Can you imagine that? Your body invents something and doesn't even bother to tell you about it? Who imagined that bodies invent things all on their own to begin with? And it turns out that instead of bending my arms at the elbows, I torque my arms. And thus my body comes down toward the floor and rises up again and goes back down toward the floor, practically bonking my body parts on the hardwood. And it's like there's no name for it because nobody's ever seen it before. How dare the body go out and invent things without even saying?
I want to see this. I want to see what you're doing because it sounds interesting. I'm trying to envision it in my head and I'm just failing.
Well, you've never seen anything like it before. Who knew that arms could do this kind of thing? It's sort of
yeah,
like
I'm trying to imagine a push-up without bending. It's just like I don't know. But it sounds interesting. I mean, whatever. It seems like it's working for you because I don't know. You say you're on a bunch of pills, but it seems to me just from looking at you and talking to you that, I mean, it seemed like you stopped aging about 10 years ago. Now, I don't know how true that feels inside of Howard Bloom.
Well, it feels very true because I have more energy and more joie de vivre than I had when I was 19 years old. In fact, if I had known what kind of joie de vivre lay ahead of me and strength when I was 19, I would have said, well, fuck being 19, man. I got to be 75. It's been enormous fun.
Well, you got to do both, so, you know.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I had to get through 19 in order to get to 75. Not that it was easy. It was hard.
What would you say, since we're talking about this kind of stuff before we get into the politics, what would you say was like the best period of life for you? You feel like it's now, or do you feel like maybe it was, I know it wasn't when you were dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome, because that was obviously a horrible time, but...
It wasn't when I was 19, because as a young person, I mean, from about the age of 5 until about the age of 65, I was clinically depressed. I was in miserable condition. So now is absolutely the best time. I mean, you have 75 years of experience under your belt. It's as if each decade you've hauled yourself up another step on a staircase. And then at each step is the top step, and you have to build the next step on up. And somehow my life has been building the next steps on up, and I have more tools at my disposal than I've ever had in my lifetime. I have more contacts in my life than I've ever had in my lifetime. I'm positioned to do things that I could never have done even 10 years ago.
Why do you think that for most people it's a decline? Like, I know 75-year-olds and stuff, and I mean, like, look, some of them are like you, where they stay sharp and they seem just as much in control of their faculties as they ever did, and then other people, by the time they're 75, they're just doddering, kind of like, like what. What in your mind separates you from that crowd? Is it just genetic happenstance? Is it luck? Is it a lifestyle? I mean, what is that?
Well, it's a bunch of things. One of the things is there's this suicidal concept in American society called retirement.
Right.
And it means that all of a sudden, at the age of 65, you pull yourself out of everything that was meaningful to you in your life. And you basically say, bring on the Alzheimer's. I can't wait until I can't remember anything. It'll hurt less when I can't remember a thing. And and I used to lecture poor Buzz Aldrin on the fact that every day that you wake up is the first day of the most important 20 days of your life. Because now you've got all these tools under your belt you never had before, and now you can aspire to go the next notch up. Well, it was I'd been lecturing poor Buzz on this for a while, and then it occurred to me to look up how old he was. And at that point, he was about 86 years old. And still, that's the way Buzz leads his life. That's the way I lead my life. And it helps. There's another thing. There's this set of experiments called parabiosis.
Mm-hmm.
And in parabiosis, you take an elderly rat, and the elderly rat is, his brain is aging, his heart is aging, his kidneys are aging. And you hook his circulatory system up to the circulatory system of a younger rat. And all of a sudden, the older rat's brain starts reversing in age, its heart starts reversing in age, its kidneys stop reversing in age. So they've been trying to figure out for the last 10 years or so what the active ingredient is in the blood of the younger rat. And it turns out the active ingredient they've been able to identify the most easily is called oxytocin. Well, remember, I was stuck in bed for 15 years with this really serious illness, and I thought I'd never get out of that bed again in my life. And had to experiment with a whole bunch of things that showed promise for this illness. It's called myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I started using is oxytocin. So if there's any, I have to inject 1 cc of it every single day. So that may be part of the solution. I had to start I take 30 different pills every day because those are what got me out of bed and are hopefully keeping me out of bed. So far, so good. And another one is called gabapentin, and it works on a system in the body called the GABA glutamate system. That is one of the most vital parts of the body, and most people don't know about it. And I swear it's the greatest antidepressant on the face of the earth. Plus, I have a whole lifestyle. I mean, Pandora didn't exist during the first God knows how many years of my life, the first 65 years of my life or so.
Right. So and you're a great lover of music, so.
Yeah, and cafes. I mean, I can work in a cafe. It was back in 2003 when I first got out of bed. I had to spend 6 months trying to convince the owners of the cafe I was working in back then to install this radically new thing that they felt would kill their business. It's called Wi-Fi. And once they got it, hey, man, you're surfing the world every day. And I'm sitting in a cafe and there are people around me. I'm not stuck at home, which is absolutely miserable. I mean, being isolated, solitary, destroys you. It kills you. It kills your biology. It kills your psychology.
Right. So basically, it seems like to me, it's just it's a combination of a whole lot of different drugs and just doing what you want to do and not isolating yourself and not saying, well, I'm retired, I'm not going to work anymore. You know, you're all about, I'm going to continue, I'm going to work till I die, and I'm going to take my 30 drug cocktail every day. Are they all drugs or are some of them supplements? Is it like supplements and drugs, or is it just drugs, or what is it?
It's about 25 supplements and about 5 drugs.
Cool.
And when it comes to how I want to live my life, I had this partner. I worked on harvesting solar energy in space and sending it down to Earth,
right, space
with
solar,
a kind of harmless radio waves or microwaves that you use with your cell phone. And I worked on that for about 4 or 5 years with a guy named Dr. APJ Kalam, who was the 11th president of India, and was also India's major rocket scientist. He developed their whole rocket program that by now has put up about 150 satellites into space.
Cool.
And Kalam, when he was 83 years old, was in the middle of giving a lecture, and all of a sudden he collapsed to the stage.
Right.
He dropped dead.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going to have to drop dead, first of all, I thoroughly disapprove of dropping dead. Try not to do it if you can help it. Try never to die. But if you're going to have to go, that's the way to go. Doing your work to the best of your ability and enthusing over it, surfing the minds of a crowd and bringing them to a peak. So And work is not a chore, at least not if you're doing the work that you're most cut out to do, the work that you enjoy the most. Work is salvation.
Right. And
Work is
and I read a statistic recently that said only like 7% of people, or some insanely low number of people, are actually satisfied with the work they do and the jobs they have and all that stuff. So I think a lot of people, maybe it's just this doldrum of doing work that doesn't suit them, that doesn't inspire them or whatever. That kind of I'm sure it's not anywhere near a sole factor, but it could be a factor in why there's this decline in a lot of people, because they're not really doing work that excites them or interests them. But obviously, you've throughout your life done work that fascinated you. Back in the '80s, you were the head of a was it a publishing company or a PR company or?
I founded the biggest PR firm in the music industry and worked with Prince, with Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Kiss, Queen, Run DMC, Billy Joel, Billy Idol, Paul Simon, Peter Gabriel, David Byrne, and the list just keeps on going.
Right, and so I mean, it was. You and I've heard on your Joe Rogan appearance, and I've heard from you personally when we've talked in the past, about your approach to that and trying to really, bring out the true sort of passions that exist within people. I think what do you call it? The gods inside of us, or something along those
Yeah, the
lines.
gods inside. I mean, if you were going to be my client, TJ, I'd sit you down on the other side of my desk and say, look, if you expect me to create an artificial mask for you, what we call an image, and tell you it's going to make you a star, I'm going to send you to my best competitor, and I'll get you an appointment within 2 hours. If you're going to work with me, you have to know that we're going to dig down to the very soul of you and find out what that soul is. And what do we mean by soul? When you're sitting down at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to write a lyric, and you're absolutely certain you cannot write one, and you wonder how you've ever written a lyric in your life, and on a good day, 2 hours later, there's a lyric in front of you, and you wonder where the hell that came from. You go on stage, you see the audience members' faces melt, you see their pupils dilate, you see their entire energy come together like a giant amoeba. You see that amoeba reach a pseudopod out to you, and that pseudopod is a tunnel for all of their energy, and you have an out-of-body experience, and you become like an empty pipe through which that audience energy flows, and it flows up to some sort of God knows what, and is utterly transmogrified and flows back down again. And then an hour and a half later, you're walking off stage feeling totally empty. Well, the soul of you is the thing that takes you over and dances you like a marionette on stage. If you're gonna work with me, we're gonna find that, because music is a soul exchange. It's not an exchange of pieces of plastic. It's not an exchange of money. It's not an exchange of downloads. It's an exchange of human soul. And if you're willing to work with me on that basis, I'll work with you. Otherwise, sorry, I'll get you an appointment elsewhere.
Yeah, and
So
it seems like a good approach, especially I don't know, thinking about it from the perspective of an artist, an entertainer, or whatever. It seems to me like it's all about getting to like the true essence of what makes that person special, instead of just like you said, crafting an image or trying to be like, oh well, say this thing at this time, and this is our data shows that this is popular, so you're going to do that or whatever the hell. You got to be a trailblazer, and you have to walk your own path. But
well, you
anyway,
do that with work. And something
yeah.
encouraging happened the day before yesterday. My cousin Debbie has founded 2 schools in Harlem, the Harlem Village Academies.
Hmm.
And they take in random kids off the street in Harlem. These are black kids who normally would fail in other schools. And they turn them into super scholars. And these kids get into college at a ferocious rate. And they stay in college to graduation at a ferocious rate. So Morning Joe was asking her, what's the secret? And she said, I sit down with my kids and I tell them, your task in life is to find your calling. It's to find the things that excite you the most. Now, if you're telling this to average black kids off the street, and they are capable of following their passions for the rest of their lives, they are capable of finding their calling, then you are capable of finding your calling, because you don't have the disadvantages these kids have.
Right.
And finding your calling and finding your passions and following them is the most important thing that you can do. And then there's the love the one you're with principle, which is that once you're in touch with your passions, even in what seems to be a random job, you can find there's room for your passions. In fact, that the job you're in is the perfect place to be to follow your passions. That happened with me in the rock and roll business. Whoever imagined I'd get involved in rock and roll? I grew up listening to Rachmaninoff and Beethoven and Bach, with a little bit of Stravinsky thrown in, not to rock and roll music. And yet it turned out to be the perfect place to find what I was looking for. And what I was looking for from the age of 12 on was the ecstatic experience, the experience that pulls you out of yourself and makes you feel part of something much bigger than yourself. It's an ecstasy. It's an exhilaration of
and
a
of course,
strange kind.
another thing that I saw you talk about on Rogan was, how political demagogues, people like, let's say Adolf Hitler, used that ecstatic experience for their own needs. And
Absolutely.
I'm basically just trying to look for a transition into politics because we have a lot of people. I mean, like you and I were joking earlier that you said it's basically like the entire population of Paraguay is running for the Democratic nomination right now. Right. Everyone wants to be the one to go up against Trump in 2020 to unseat Trump. We have so many candidates. I don't know, just across the board. I mean, I don't know how many are actually involved at this point. 20s, 30s.
It's probably close to 20.
Yeah, it's a crazy high number. Some of them, obviously not all of them are. When you got 20 people, a lot of people are polling at 1% or less. So there's not a lot of I don't want to guess what ultimately the field is going to become at this early stage, but it seems like a lot of people probably are not going to be in there too long. They're probably going to kind of give it their shot and then kind of fade away. But there are some candidates who definitely seem to have some momentum and some built-in support and stuff like that. I was wondering if you I don't know if it's maybe too early for this, or maybe you're waiting for someone else to enter the race, but did you have anyone at this point that you were looking at and saying, that's my guy or my gal or whatever, that's who I'm throwing my support behind?
Well, I'm swamped with email from all of the candidates every single day, and I read it because I want to know what they stand for. Right. And so far, I haven't been able to figure out what any of the female candidates stand for, with the exception of Elizabeth Warren, right, who made it very clear when she talked about breaking up Facebook, Google, and Amazon.
An interesting idea.
Well, she lost me on that one because when I was sick in bed for those 15 years, Facebook, Amazon, and Google saved my life. Right. And Facebook continues to save my life. It gives me community. I can throw up an idea on Facebook and have responses within 10 seconds.
Right.
It's a sense of community that's just unbelievable. And all of these things benefit from the network effect. That is, the greater the number of customers they have, the more useful they are to you and me.
Right. But I think that there's a flip side to that, where the greater the number of customers they have, the more that they disproportionately can control the narrative, can censor out voices that they don't necessarily like or that might be going against their agenda in some way. I think a lot of people feel like they've gotten too powerful.
Well, that could be, but it's us. For the last 3 years, we have been urging them collectively to start censoring themselves, to start getting rid of what we regard as hate speech or we regard as extremist speech.
But is that really us, or is that old media? Because from my standpoint, as someone who's been dealing with this for a while, I feel like there is a lot of jealousy from the old media dinosaurs who are mad that social media is eating their lunch. They're mad that a new generation of voices has sprung up and that they're not necessarily controlled by corporate interests. And so they're trying to put the genie back in the bottle. And the way they're doing that is by amplifying and magnifying every sort of criticism of these social media cultures in order to pressure these companies into pro-censorship policies. But I don't know. What's your take on that?
The media is not really capable of manipulating people as much as we like to think. Because ideas, look, right now, journalists are after clickbait. They
Right.
are measured by how many views they get on a given story, which means they have to follow the public interest. If
Yeah.
they float certain story ideas, much as they might be advantageous to their news outlets, to their bosses, and those ideas don't bring in clicks, don't bring in views, they're dead. They have
Right.
to pursue something else. And one of the ideas, so in a sense, the media is our creation.
Right. But
Even
I
though
feel
we are
like
the
it
media.
used, correct me if you think that this is incorrect, but I feel like there used to be a lot of news agencies and sources used to operate at a loss, because it was viewed as like, well, providing news is this civic duty and all this. And then at some point it became about actually, news has to turn a profit too. And to me, that's when, things really went south, because it did become about, we got to get the clicks. We got to get, it became less about we have a duty as the fourth estate to inform the public, and it became more about like, how can we get as many eyeballs as possible? How can we wield the biggest influence possible? Do you think that there's some truth to that, or?
But the bottom line is this: that these platforms have to be like the phone company used to be. The phone company was not there to censor what you and I said to each other on the phone.
Right.
It was there to provide an open channel through which we could say anything we wanted.
Right.
And then if somebody else wanted to come down on us and put us in jail for something we said, it wasn't the phone company's job to jail us.
Right.
Well, we've been demanding via the media. The media and us have been in a synergistic circuit with each other, goosing each other, and we've been goosing each other for Facebook and Google to control the content. No, I don't. I mean, look, I risked my career several times to fight for freedom of speech, to fight against censorship. That's absolutely vital to me. Look, I'm not capable of doing any normal human activities. I can't play baseball. I can't even polish a car. I was fired from a job painting a house because it took me 2 days to paint 3 feet of one board. And that wasn't exactly what was going to make a profit for the guy who ran the painting company. So the only thing I can do is words, and take my freedom of words away, and you've just shot me in the head. But all of us are like that. I mean, you've experienced some of the forces of censorship from YouTube.
Right.
I'm
far from the only one. I mean, so many people that I know across the spectrum, either people have been directly censored, of course, and that's easy to spot. But what's far more insidious to me is that a lot of times these companies they won't outright censor you, but they'll make unpopular speech so difficult to monetize, or so difficult to get virality with, that it just they figure out ways to incentivize you against it in very insidious forms. But getting back to what you were saying earlier about it being treated like the phone company, one idea that is popularly floated around, I see it a lot on the left, I see it a lot on the right as well, is the idea that, in order to protect freedom of speech, we need to get to a point where these social media giants are treated more like a public utility, and we extend the First Amendment in some way, shape, or form to extend to these platforms. Would you be in favor of that idea, or an idea that's like along those lines, or do you think that goes too far? Do you think that some people feel like, oh, it's like a government takeover of a private entity or interest? But I really, where I'm at is that I feel like, okay, well, this is a mass communications platform. It's dishonest to say that this isn't how people are communicating these days. So I don't think we can necessarily leave that into the hands of, tech company oligarchs who are beholden to public pressure. There has to be legal protections that keep that space a right. And even Jack Dorsey, on his recent appearance on Joe Rogan, even though a lot of his actions contradict this, his words on that program were that he does view Twitter as being a right. So, where do you fall on that spectrum? You think you're somewhere in the middle, or you think you're more towards one side or the other?
I'm definitely on one side, and the side is freedom of speech. Look, yesterday in New Zealand, something absolutely atrocious and
Horrible.
appalling.
Yeah.
Yeah, a guy walked into two different mosques and he killed a total of 49 people.
Hideous.
When one woman was trying to crawl away from him and she was wounded and bleeding,
Yeah.
and she was trying to crawl away down the aisle, he walked over to her, put the gun up to her head, and finished her off.
Did you see? Did you see the video?
Oh, I didn't see the video.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making is that these guys write manifestos, and he wrote a 78-page manifesto.
Yeah, I've read it.
Well, his manifesto should remain available on whatever outlet. I mean, on the internet.
I think it's important. I think it's important that people recognize. People need to see what caused this.
Exactly.
The people need. It needs to.
Blind.
I don't understand this idea that. I guess I understand the concern that maybe if you make the manifesto and the video, if that's available to people, then maybe it's going to encourage others to do what he did. But honestly, like, that's going to happen anyway. I think it's important for everyday people to see this is what led to this. This is the kind of, I mean, like, I still go with the sunlight is the best disinfectant model of, this guy put out this manifesto. Let's make it available to people so that people can see, like, this is the ideology that led him to do this heinous, despicable, evil, whatever you want to call it, act. And you know what? If people out there view that act as being a good thing, then those are just the kind of people that are going to see it that way no matter what, and they're going to find that manifesto regardless. I think it's important for people who don't agree with it to see it.
I agree with you totally. You could take all of those words and put them in my mouth, and they accurately summarize how I feel about this. We need open channels of communication, and we need to be able to take the brain power of Western society, which includes you and me, and apply it to this kind of problem. And the only way to apply it is if we know what the hell is going on.
Right. And I feel like why is there such an interest, you think, in keeping us in the dark?
Well, it's not patriarchal. What's it called? It's the society as Big Brother, trying to avoid upsetting us and trying to avoid reproducing crimes of this sort. But I'm sorry, with the United States Constitution does not say in the First Amendment that the American Constitution guarantees the right of the government to be our big brother, or that it guarantees to the right of any monopolist or oligarch or Google owner to solve the problems of society by keeping us in the dark. That's the beginning of Big Brother, and it's through putting a yeasty batch of brains to work on a problem and giving them all the material they need that we solve problems. That's the hope of democracy.
What, in your mind, is the solution to something like that? Like, do you have any ideas as to why this happened? I'm assuming that you've probably at least taken a look at the manifesto.
Well, I have a YouTube video coming out within probably the next hour or two.
Oh, okay.
On this, in which I dig into the guy's manifesto and give you a sense of the history of the movement, and it goes all the way back to the late 1960s with the Turner Diaries, and you could probably trace it all the way back to the Shays Rebellion in the time of George Washington.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, society is a set of subcultures that are competing with each other, and it always is. And some people will find their way into each subculture. We've managed to calm down or decrease the rate at which Europeans are being killed by militant Muslims by coming close to exterminating ISIS, although there is no exterminating ISIS.
Right. Well, I don't believe. I mean, look, you exterminate ISIS, then the next day it's it was Al Qaeda, then it's ISIS, then it's who knows what it is next. But there's always going to be, here's the new iteration of the radical Islamist element, or it could be a radical right-wing element, or it could be a radical this or that element. There's always people who view it as their right or duty or whatever to use violence to spread their agenda.
That's violence is the key word. We do not have a right to violence.
Right.
We have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the first word is life. And though that phrase has been hijacked by the anti-abortion people, the right to life, I'm sorry, it applies to human beings, to actually people who are out of the womb. So we don't have a right to kill each other, and we have to stop the killing to the best of our ability. And in fact, without knowing how we've done it, we've done that very successfully. Since 1650, the rate of peace in the world has gone up by a factor of 10.
Right.
In other words, if you've been born in 1650 or in one of those wonderful indigenous societies where people live in harmony with nature and at peace with each other, your odds of dying a death at the hands of a fellow human being were 10 times what they are today.
And Steven Pinker wrote a great book about the decline of violence in society over the,
And in the Lucifer Principle, the book that you wrote, that you read,
I wrote it. Cool.
Yes, there's a page and a half on this.
Yeah.
And that evokes a whole bunch of statistics.
Right, and I remember it was one of the. I actually do remember that page and a half or so of the book where I was like, "What?" Because people definitely get the impression, I think, that violence is on the rise, that times are worse than ever, and I don't know what it is in the psyche, or maybe it's just the fact that we're so saturated with information now, where we feel like, oh my God, we live in such violent times, even though we don't. Maybe it's the fact that we live in such uncertain times, because I don't know if anyone can really argue with that. I mean, we were talking earlier about it, about just when I was asking about the interesting times we live in now, you were kind of like, well, interesting for all the wrong reasons, basically. Well,
let's go back to that word uncertain.
Right.
We do live in the most uncertain of times.
Yeah.
Why? Because the most uncertain time of all is the present. Why? Because we have no idea of what's going to happen next.
Yeah,
that's
but
uncertainty.
I feel like even like in the past, if you're living a pretty simple, like agrarian life, the uncertainty is like, will the crops come in, or will the frost kill them? There is uncertainty. And there's life and death, and there's all that stuff, but now people are so much more aware of like the fact that of the black swans out there. There's just so many things that are just beyond your imagination that could just transpire at a moment's notice, and what if this happens? What if that happens? And people are so paranoid now, and there's so many conspiracy theories, and there's so many different ideas about what's really going on and who's really controlling things. And there's people who think the earth is flat, and there's people who think that the earth is run by reptilian aliens from Sirius Minor, and there's people who think that it's all run by a global cabal of elitists. There's people who think it's run by your people, the Jews, for fuck's sake. There's all kinds of different ideas about the secret global powers that are really pulling the strings and doing the stuff. And then there's worries about nukes and biological weapons and just a ton of stuff that people just never had to worry about in the past. They just had to worry about, like, is the crops coming in? Is our God on the volcano pleased? It was a simpler time.
Well, it really wasn't. If you look at the Babylonian cuneiform libraries, there are these libraries of up to 70,000 cuneiform tablets. Cuneiform was the written language of the Babylonians, the Mesopotamians, from about roughly 5,500 years ago on. And you see what the priests were called, the questions the priests were called upon to answer by their kings, their heads. And it was, are we going to be overrun and slaughtered by some other people? Is the weather going to destroy us all? It was one source of destruction after another that they were.
So they were basically just trying to figure out, like, we know we're going to be destroyed, but what's going to do it?
Yes, they imagine destruction right around every single corner.
So you think I'm just committing the fallacy then of
presentism.
Presentism, basically, like. My time is so unique and so different, but really this paranoia is just a property of a human being in any era, place, time, whatever.
Well, one of the greatest gifts humans have is their dissatisfaction, and their dissatisfaction goes through every era of human history. It's why.
Sorry, my dog is barking at me.
It's trying to ask a question.
He's worried about the destruction at the gates, apparently.
Aha. Well, the opening lines of A Tale of Two Cities, the opening paragraph is brilliant. It says it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the time of heavenly bliss. It was the time of appalling misery. And it goes on with a whole bunch of these things.
Right, and we could look at that and say that's the same as today, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But back to why this exists, because the present is the most uncertain moment in history. Why? Because we have no clue as to what's coming next. And we know what was going to come next an hour ago. It's happened since then. We know what was going to come next a year ago. That's already happened. The past is already locked in certainty.
Right, yeah.
But this moment that represents the cutting edge is filled with potential appalling things, and humans are addicted to apocalyptic ideas.
Yeah,
and we've been.
Sorry, you're so hard to herd, Howard. You're so hard to herd in one place. But I'm gonna get you on this 2020 election. I see an opening here, because this is like the uncertainty of the time. People look at Trump, and obviously the vast majority of Americans look at Trump and say, meh, dissatisfied, do not want.
Right.
So we need an alternative. And, I feel like for a lot of people, they're looking at the Democratic field and they're kind of like, I'm not sure. There's too many choices. There's too many things going on.
The Democratic field is going to surprise you because it's got so many astonishingly good candidates that it's ridiculous. There's Pete Buttigieg, or whatever his name is, who comes out of the Midwest.
There's what's his name? He's a great one,
Right. It's Buttigieg or Buttigieg or something like that.
Right.
Anyway, so he's the first gay candidate. He is so smart. He has such a practical sense of how to solve problems. He has such a good television presence that it's astonishing.
See, I haven't even heard of them. I haven't heard. There's too many for me. There's so many that I told you about one you hadn't heard of earlier, Andrew Yang, who's getting really popular. Right. You're telling me about one I haven't heard of. There's just so many that, like, even people like you and me that are into this politics shit for whatever reason, are just like, oh, that's another one. Okay, it's like.
Oh, and there are more of these unknowns coming out of the woodwork.
Oh yeah, tons. And right now it's looking like, topping all the polls. It seems like to me that and once again, it's very early. We don't know what's going to happen yet. And Joe Biden, I don't think has even officially announced yet, but he's expected to. But it seems like right now the favored candidate of, and we talked a little bit earlier about the chasm, the schism, the whatever you want to call it, that I think started in 2016 when it was the Bernie movement versus the Hillary thing. And I think something like 7 or 8% of Bernie supporters went on to vote for Trump. And a lot of them went on to just not vote, period. Including myself. I didn't vote.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, I didn't do it. So we have this division. And it seems like right now, according to the polls I'm seeing, the division is now taking the form of Bernie's back once again, running again, versus Joe Biden. He's topping the polls for the centrist vote. Bernie's topping the polls for the progressive vote. And it just seems like we're going to have the same sort of divide again unless some other candidate comes up out of the woodwork and steals the show from that whole ordeal or mess or whatever you want to call it.
Well, here's where the divide stands as of yesterday.
Right.
Bernie Sanders was the only Democrat to actually boil down what he wanted to do into a platform.
Right.
And it was a very simple platform. Advanced education, higher education for everybody, Medicare for everybody. And those were the 2 out of the 5 most outstanding parts of his platform. But he is brilliant at boiling things down to simple things you can grasp.
Right, and Hillary did not have that ability at all. I follow that election as closely as anybody, and if you ask me today to just name one Hillary policy that she was pushing to implement, and I couldn't even fucking tell you what it is.
No, there were
I would
not.
just stare at you blankly and be like, she was a woman. That's about all I
Yeah,
know.
she got lost. She got lost in the details, and Bernie does not. He's a brilliant boiler downer. But the split is between the progressive wing of the party, best represented by Ocasio-Cortez, and the moderate part of the party. Now, two candidates in the last 48 hours have said they are capitalists, which means they have said, I'm not part of this pro-socialist progressive movement.
Yeah.
And they are Beto O'Rourke
and
Elizabeth Warren. Both of them have said explicitly that they're capitalists. So that's the split in the Democratic Party. In the Republican Party, there's a similar split. It's the Trump fanatics versus the traditional Republicans.
But that split, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm not in that camp, but it seems like that split is not as drastic. And I know that among Republicans, Trump polls very well.
90%.
Well. Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't seem like there's much of a split. It seems like they're pretty much behind Trump, and then there's a few people out there that are kind of like, I'm not as much into the Trump thing. But
Mitt Romney has very, in my opinion, has very deliberately run and placed himself in the Senate, I think it is, for a simple reason. He's there to wait for the moment of ultimate dissatisfaction with Trump when Republicans come rushing back to Republican normalcy. And he's there to provide a catalyst and become the champion of the normal Republicans. Now, the split Republican Party has been going on for roughly 6 to 8 years, ever since.
Their split is older, but I feel like it's getting a little bit more towards reconciliation. But it seems like it's come at the cost of a lot of the things that the Republican Party used to stand for. Whereas, with Trump, you can't make any sort of claim to that stuff anymore.
Well, Trump is an utterly unique phenomenon. He's, and he said, there's a frog in my throat.
Ribbit.
He said day before yesterday to Breitbart News that he's got all the bully boys in his corner. He's got the army. He's got the bikers for Trump. He has the NRA. He has all of those people who are armed, and that right now they're behaving themselves. But if something that they don't like happens, they're going to do something really, really bad. Well, if he lost the election in 2020, that's the really bad thing he's talking about. So what is he really implying? That if he fails to win in 2020, there's going to be a civil war. And plus, there's going to be his interpretation of his losing. His interpretation of losing by 3 million votes to Hillary Clinton is that there were 3 million votes cast by illegal aliens, that it was vote rigging, that it was vote fraud.
But does he really believe that, or is that just something he says to...
Trump's brilliance comes from his ability to convince himself of whatever he believes at the moment. And to forget that he ever believed anything else. So he is totally convincing. Remember, Trump is a con man. That's how he's made his living. And to be a good con man, you have to give other people this ebullient sense of confidence in what you are saying. And to get that ebullient sense of confidence, to get it across to others, you have to convince yourself. So every lie Trump tells, the Washington Post has got him up to over 8,000 lies in his first 2 years in office. Every lie that Trump tells, he believes at the moment with absolute conviction and sincerity. So in a sense, the next election is going to be sanity versus psychopathic.
Well, I mean, maybe we need, maybe it should be psychopath versus psychopath. I don't know if it necessarily needs to be a psychopath, but it should be crazy versus crazy, maybe we need our own crazy fuck. I'm just saying.
But there are no truly crazy people on the Democratic side. Even Ocasio-Cortez, look, I came out with a YouTube saying fuck Ocasio-Cortez.
Because of the Amazon thing, yeah.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to having Amazon in the city. Amazon would have created a whole mess of jobs with an average income of $150,000 a year.
Yeah.
And it would have paid $2.7 billion a year into New York coffers. Well, Ocasio-Cortez says she killed the Amazon New York deal in order to protect the neighborhoods of New York City. Well, think of how well you could protect those neighborhoods with an extra $2.7 billion a year.
Right.
Ocasio-Cortez is crazy. But she's not crazy the way Donald Trump is crazy. She
Yeah.
is mentally sane. It's just she has points of view that I disagree with.
Right. And
Dramatically.
I think that, first of all, I think she's exaggerating her influence on those events, because everything I've read about why the deal fell apart, you can read tons of articles about why it fell apart that don't even mention her by name. So I think that she's kind of.
I looked into it too, and I did some research on it. And her name is very prominent because
I think she's kind of puffing up her role, though. I'm not saying that she played no role at all. I'm just saying that there was a lot more to it than just, Queen Cortez showed up and said, "There shall be no Amazon," and lo, Amazon was gone. But I think a lot of people, especially in the progressive wing of the party, it really rubs them the wrong way when there's a company that they feel like is not paying its fair share of taxes to begin with, that is getting a huge incentive from the city. And I understand your point that they would have brought in more money than they were getting in tax relief or whatever. But there's also concerns about them raising the rent in neighborhoods. And one concern I have that I haven't seen anyone mention is, okay, these jobs that Amazon's going to bring, that's all well and good until they fucking automate all of them away, which they're making huge strides every day towards doing. So I don't know if the 25,000 jobs they bring to New York, I mean, I'm thinking in 10, 15, 20 years, that's going to shrink tremendously just due to automation.
Won't. I mean, that's a myth, that automation is going to destroy jobs. When I was a kid, 10 years old, the year was 1953,
right.
And there were science fiction stories about the fact that automation was going to so utterly change the nature of work that we would pay people just to laze around and do nothing and to consume.
Well, that sounds great. So let's just, I want to get there. I'm looking for that.
No, but it never happens.
Yeah, well, but look, you got some jobs, it's not going to get rid of the concept of a job, but certain jobs that exist now are not going to exist in 20, 30 years.
Right.
Truck driver, probably not going to exist. Taxi driver, already on its last legs. Tons of factory workers going to become superfluous. Any sort of repetitive task, like we're already seeing McDonald's go towards automation, like all these fast food jobs are going. A lot of these, a lot of jobs that existed, not even due to automation, but like the mom and pop stores that were fucked by Walmart and big conglomerates like that are going even more by the wayside. A bunch of our malls are closing. Because of Amazon, which is hugely automated, already has a huge automated workforce going already. I understand that people are, there's going to be different sectors that need human labor, that, the stuff that machines just can't quite do yet because it requires, maybe some critical thinking and some adjusted invariance and being able to look at the lay of the land and stuff like that. But I mean, some jobs are definitely going away, and it's going to be a painful transition, just like there was a painful transition in the Industrial Revolution. Now we're in a new sort of tech industrial revolution, and there's going to be some changes. There's probably going to be some social turmoil and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't mean just Amazon especially. I mean, like they're pushing right now for you've heard I'm sure you've heard their ideas about sky fulfillment centers and drones being sent out constantly with packages and stuff and dropping them right on your doorstep and shit like that. Now, at this point, it still kind of sounds like science fiction, but I think it's credible at some point. I don't know. I have some concerns about automation. Tell me why I'm wrong about it.
Because every time we've automated, we've opened up new jobs. One thing, Donald Trump doesn't very often tell the truth, but one thing that he was honest about is we have more jobs today than ever in human history.
Right, but we have more people too.
Yeah, we have more people. So the percentage, we have an unemployment rate below 4%, which is terrific. Right. But the fact is that right now we are living in the future that those science fiction stories in 1953 were talking about, when we should all be laying around with no more work to do, and yet we have more work to do than ever. Human society expands to fit the whole of possibility space.
Right.
And the more you empower us with automating things that are, as you said, repetitive and boring, um, the more you give us room to develop jobs in whole new areas. Whoever imagined a Wikipedia? Whoever imagined an internet?
Right.
Um,
But the
whoever in
people,
1950
the people
now
updating Wikipedia, they're not getting really paid for that for the
they're
most part.
they're
So,
not getting paid, but they're providing an enormous social
right.
good.
I agree with
And
that.
okay, let's go back to my cousin who was on Morning Joe
Right.
and said that her secret with what she tells her kids, just plucked off the streets of Harlem.
And
That
real
were,
quickly, what is your cousin's name again? Debbie something?
her name is Deborah Cooker Kenny.
Deborah Cooker Kenny.
and
Okay.
and her two schools are called the Harlem Village Academies.
Okay.
And she's on Oprah's list of the 20 most important women in America.
Awesome.
And she's on Esquire's list of the 20 most important women in America, and all kinds of stuff like that.
Awesome.
Now,
Cool.
she's telling these kids not to dream of jobs as janitors or parking attendants, but to find their calling, to
Right.
find the source of their passion in life. What enables that is the taking of repetitive jobs and automating them so humans can do even more of what they do best,
Right.
which is following their dreams, following their passions, following their creative
So
instinct.
let me ask you this. So let's say, you and I I mean, do we both agree that like a truck driver job is probably not going to exist for a human
Oh,
being in
right.
20, 30 years? So you're a trucker right now, right? Let's say
Right.
you're a guy who's right now you're driving a truck and you're in your, 40s or 50s. Like, what do you say to that person who, his job is going bye-bye in the next few decades?
What have you
there's-
always wanted to do more than anything else in life? That's
Right.
what you say to the trucker.
Yeah.
What's your ultimate dream? What did you think would bring nubile young women crawling to your feet and offering to kiss you all the way up the shins and God knows where above that?
Right.
All of your life. What are the heroic things that you imagine would define you? The time to start doing them is now. If it means taking some courses, take the fucking courses. The government will help pay for it. But get yourself in the position where you are the ultimate artist that you always imagined that you could be.
Right.
Because it's the age of artistry. It is the age when you can follow your passions and your dreams. It's the age when you can put together boutique style things like Airbnb.
Yeah. So let me ask you. So automation is definitely one of the big driving forces behind the presidential campaign of Andrew Yang, and I understand that it was someone who I just introduced you to earlier today. Now, his solution to the problems he sees is he wants to do, I think he calls it the freedom dividend, which is basically everyone in America over the age of 18 gets $1,000 a month forever, just for existing. You're a citizen of this country. You're going to get a share of all this tech money and all this automation money that's happening because we're not going to stop it. And it's going to create new money and new stuff, but you deserve a part of that. So here's your $1,000 a month. And he kind of frames it as, he's not trying to do socialism. He's trying to do capitalism that doesn't start at zero. What do you think of that idea? And once again, I understand that it was something that I just kind of sprung on you like an hour before we started, or 20 minutes or whatever it was. What do you make of that? And and I don't know if he has a huge following out there right now. He's up to the 65,000 donation benchmark that he needs to be in the debates. He's polling at around 1-2% right now. But if you go on the internet, travel in the circles that I do, you hear his name all over the place. You see people hashtagging Yang Gang, Yang Gang, Yang Gang. And it's people from the left and the right, interestingly enough. What do you make of that and that phenomena based on, the little you were able to glean of it from the short period of time since, I showed it to you a moment ago?
Well, let's go into first the guaranteed annual income. I started researching that about 5 years ago. I thought it was a wildly impractical idea.
Right.
It's coming at me in particular from a friend from Norway,
right,
who's a social scientist.
So you're familiar with the UBI concept for sure, then.
Yeah, exactly. And the first administration to take that idea seriously and to take the idea of proposing it seriously was Richard Nixon's administration.
Yeah, that's true.
So the idea has been around for a while. And I think it's a good idea because we need to give people the freedom to pursue their passions, to pursue their calling, to pursue that which they have to offer to society, which society is most willing to pay them for, but which does tap their primary emotions.
Yeah.
And the more of that, the better. I mean, look at the huge needs we have in society. All of those people coming down with Alzheimer's, all of those people isolated in their homes because they've passed the age of 80 and they can no longer get out and walk the way that they used to. These people are desperate for company, and they're desperate for people who care about them. That's a social good,
right,
if we can provide that.
And it's a very demand side economics idea, which appeals to me because I'm not really big into the supply side thing. I just don't think it works.
Right.
Or I don't think it works for the people it needs to work for anyway. I think it does work for a certain segment of society, but
and then think of all the kids who need more attention than they are getting. Attention is the oxygen of the human soul.
Right.
And especially for kids. And if you've got 35 kids in a class, and I'm talking 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds,
right,
the more people they can have who care about clusters of 4 to 5 kids at a time, the healthier those kids are going to turn out. We're not able to supply that right now. What Andrew Yang's big idea is providing a social credit and replacing or at least creating a form of currency that doesn't yet exist. And it's a form of currency that deals in these kinds of social goods that we are talking about. And it is very hard not to get satisfaction out of caring for another human being. As long as that human being regards you as having dignity and an individual personality and as being somebody interesting to talk with, relationships not only help little kids, and they not only help people who are aging and now are infirm, it helps the people who are the caregivers.
Do you think that within that social currency system, that there is, though, a tremendous, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is here, a tremendous sort of potential for abuse where, you basically turn, the same problems we're talking about with social media now just become problems across, existence. And, it's like, oh, you said something that people don't like, so your social credit score is low. You have some controversial ideas, now you're a pariah, and it becomes like a new sort of caste system. Because I think that's a fear that I have, and I definitely, before embracing a policy like that, I would want to see, tremendous assurances that there were going to be things to prevent that sort of outcome. Like, let's reward good behaviors, but let's not necessarily use it punitively to punish bad ones. But I don't know.
No, I worry about the same thing, that it would become a giant patronage system, that it would allow those in power politically to give out the goodies to those who follow them. And what you just described, a social credit system that keeps track of your every word.
Right,
and
that's already in China, right?
Yes, that's exactly what China has now. It has installed a social credit system.
Right.
And saying something the government doesn't like loses you social credit. And that social credit influences the way that you are treated across the entire country.
Yeah. So they're definitely, I'm not fundamentally opposed to the idea, but I'm fundamentally opposed to the idea becoming something like that.
Me too.
Would you say, you're okay, so you're in agreement there. Well, we've been talking for about an hour. Do you have some more time to spare, or do you want to get going?
More time.
Okay, cool. So let's talk then about, let's kind of go back to when I think that this split started. Let's go back to Bernie and Hillary for a second. Well, actually, let's go past Bernie and Hillary. Let's go to Hillary versus Trump, because unfortunately, it's been discussed a million times by a million different people, and I'm sure you've discussed it, but I've never discussed it with you. I want to know your take on why she lost that election.
Well, first of all, in the popular vote, she didn't lose the election.
Sure, but unfortunately, we don't have direct democracy in this country.
Right, so, that's true.
So why did she lose? First of all, why did she lose those crucial Rust Belt states, particularly that really enabled? Like, why did the blue wall crumble there?
She wasn't able to articulate a platform. Better together is not a platform. Better together just didn't mean anything.
It's fluff.
She wasn't also Donald Trump's brilliance, his ability to put out a new tweet every 2 hours, that puts him right up on top of the first page in the newspaper, that puts him right at the top of the headlines,
Right.
or on your Google News. Hillary said the same thing over and over again and never generated any news. If I had been working with her campaign, with my background in public relations, I would have looked for new news stories every 2 hours, and every day. But that just didn't happen with Hillary. She wasn't able to be viral. She wasn't able to find unique and interesting.
Do you think she played it too safe?
I think it's her natural tendency to be bogged down in detail.
Right.
And
I feel like let me ask you if you agree with this sentiment. I feel like as much as someone like you or someone like me does not agree with what Donald Trump is saying, he at least laid out a bold vision for what he thought should be the way America worked.
Right.
And Hillary, all you got from her was like status quo. And I don't think status quo is sexy to people. I don't think that sells. What do you think?
People want change, because if there's change, there's always a chance that you or I or anybody else who's going to vote can move up the pecking order. Change gives us that opportunity. Status quo means we stay in our same place in the pecking order, and basically candidates sell hope. And Donald Trump sold hope the best. Now, it turned out, I was covering for the entire presidential campaign for Coast to Coast, the highest rated overnight talk radio show in North America.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to watch every convention. Now, Trump, it showed right at the very beginning that no matter what he promised, it was a lie, that he would never be able to deliver on any of his promises.
Right.
And he showed that with his convention. He had claimed that he was tired of the same old way of doing conventions. They were boring. And that at his convention, you would see things you had never seen before in your life. And every major sports star and every star in Hollywood would come out to support him. Then he had his convention. His convention was like a sort of advanced high school pageant.
Right, it was terrible.
Not only did it contain all of the cliches that he had said that he would transcend, no stars came out, no people from sports came out to support him. No people.
And I think he had a coach or two, or maybe a few people like that.
He had one coach, and he had Scott Baio.
Right.
That was his.
Scott Baio. Yeah, the huge star that is.
So he talks big, but his promises are lies.
And Mexico's going to pay for the wall, and all this other stuff. Yeah.
The whole thing. So he's never really delivered on anything. The health plan would be much better than Obamacare, and we'd all have health care, and it would not cost us a cent, and we'd all have all the choice we wanted.
Right.
None of these things have come true.
So,
and yet, yeah.
I just want to ask you. You just keep going on your Trump thing. I'll ask you in a second.
Okay. Since hope is an absolute necessity for individual survival, without it, you don't survive. Without it, I don't survive.
Right.
Donald Trump continues to offer hope, and his fans, the people who stuck with him, are still sucking hope from his tit. They still, even though they don't keep track of all of the promises that have been broken, they don't keep track of the fact that Donald Trump is a liar, because to abandon Donald Trump would be to abandon all hope. Like abandon all hope, ye who enter here.
Yeah.
So they refuse to let go of him. And he is the great entertainer. Until 2 years ago, I used to spend about an hour a day while I was eating my meals watching science shows. I can't do that anymore. For the last 2 years, the news has been so popping with new Trump material, hour by hour by hour, that in order to stay on top of it, I've just had to stay tuned into the news all the time.
Right.
So for 2 years, I've been able to watch my science shows. I've just had to stay tuned in to the news. And of course, I'm in an unusual position. I'm on call to go on Coast to Coast on sometimes as little as 20 minutes notice.
So the news cycle has gotten so rapid that it's like you feel like you can't even turn away for a second at this point.
Well, and one of Trump's great secrets is what's called learned helplessness. In learned helplessness experiments, you put dogs or rats, poor puppies, you put dogs or rats on an electrified grid in a cage. And you turn the electricity on and off randomly. And when the electricity is on, it fries the feet of the poor rat or the poor dog. And about 20% of rats go through something called learned helplessness. When you open the door of the cage and they could walk out and never get a shock again on their feet for the rest of their lives, they don't bother to walk out. They just lay there and take shock after shock after shock. And Trump filled us with some, and it was like the very first week I had to deal with Trump
Yeah.
3 years ago. I realized that I have been in the habit of having 48 hours in which to fact check anything that a candidate said. And now the new pronouncements were coming so fast that there was no way I could fact check them anymore. And even I got a version of learned helplessness. We all just learn to lay there on the floor of the electrified cage and take shock after shock after shock. And how does Trump pay those of us who believe in him? Hope. Hope. And we, as I said, we're not willing to abandon hope by fact checking. Now over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about some of the big issues and agenda points that are kind of dominating this election cycle, because I think that a lot of people, like you were talking about Bernie being great at boiling stuff down to, these are some key issues that we're really going to fucking strongly run on. Policy substance has become very important to a lot of people on the Democratic side of things because they don't want another stronger together kind of just banal sort of, empty platitude. So I just wanted to ask you about some of these ideas that we're seeing going on. So let's start with the latest idea for universal health care, which is Medicare for all. What do you make of that?
I think it's incredibly fantabulous. I'm because when I came down with my illness, my wife, before she abandoned me after 34 years of marriage, she made sure she got me on Social Security.
Right.
And Social Security put me on Medicare or Medicaid or whichever it is. I think it's Medicare.
Right.
Well, the fact is, I'm 75. In the course of the last year, I for the last 2 years, I had these incredible pains in my stomach.
Yeah.
And finally, they discovered that they were kidney stones, 2 kidney stones, big ones, much too big to pass, one the size of a pea, one the size of a lima bean. I was sent in first a surgery to install a stent because my kidney was killing itself off. It wasn't draining its fluids. It was developing toxic amounts of them. So they put in a stent. That was one surgery. Then they went in and did another surgery, and they got rid of the 2 kidney stones. If that had happened without Medicare, I'd be dead by now because it would have tapped out all of my savings and I wouldn't have been able to continue to live.
Right.
But look at me. It's every day that I wake up is the first day of the most important 20 years of my life, what I used to preach to poor Buzz Aldrin. And that's a benefit of the fact that I don't have to worry about my health care. Yes, I have to worry about whether my body will survive these surgeries.
Yeah.
But I don't have to worry about whether my bank account will survive these surgeries.
Well, that's definitely a good thing. And especially a good thing for, you're in a better position than a lot of Americans are on that front for sure, too. So let's ask about another one that's maybe not quite as popular as universal health care, but does seem to pull well, which is the another Bernie Sanders idea, the free college idea. Do you think that that's a good idea?
Once upon a time, there were radical socialists in American society who were talking about doing something that was obviously socialist. And it was free public education for all American children.
Right.
And I'm sure if you and I had been around at the time, we would be arguing that this would break the bank, that there's no way America could afford this. Well, we managed to afford not just free primary education, we then managed to tack on free secondary school education. And if we tack on, and it didn't kill us. Yeah. In fact, it made us stronger. It made us
go figure that having a more educated populace would be a good thing. I don't know.
Right. So, and we can do the same thing, and we have to do the same thing with college.
Right. And I feel like especially now when, a high school education just isn't cutting it anymore for a lot of jobs and professions, and a lot of people want someone with a degree, and it's more competitive in a lot of ways. I know that, we do have, like you said, a lot more jobs than ever before, but, I feel like the jobs that are, being created in a lot of ways are going to be a little bit more intensive, intellectually intensive as well than jobs in the past. So I think it makes sense to have a well-educated workforce out there.
And think of this: if we don't do it, then China is going to do it. India is going to do it. They've already been doing it, and they will leave us in the dust. We will be a has-been as a nation.
Right. It's like I don't know what why is there so much. Maybe it's just you tell me if this is a uniquely American thing or if this is something that you think is across the globe. But it always seems like whenever someone proposes a new way of doing things, people hate the status quo, but they also hate the idea of too much change, too quick. It's not going to work. It's going to be a disaster. It's going to be a boondoggle. Like, why are people so resistant to ideas that just seem to make sense?
That's not a question I've spent a lot of time contemplating.
Right.
Because the big trick is to get these ideas to catch on. I mean, even Herbert Spencer,
right,
was considered at the time the greatest philosopher of the 19th century. And he, like me, was trying to take all of the sciences and roll them up into one ball and use them to get a big.
1 sec. I'm gonna take a quick trip to the bathroom, but you can just keep talking about Herbert Spencer while I'm gone. I'll be right back.
Okay. So actually, we're not going to keep talking about Herbert Spencer because I want TJ to hear this. The headphones. Put them in your ears, you idiot. All right. Here's one in here.
There you go.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you about that. I just heard you call yourself an idiot, and I remember something I wanted to ask you.
Yes.
We'll get back to the political issues in 1 second, but I did want to ask because you're one of the smartest people I know for sure. How many times a day?
I think I'm an idiot. So
yeah, how many times a day do you just like do something and think to yourself, "Man, I am a fucking idiot,"
that's in the hundreds.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
But I was saying before that one of the greatest human gifts is dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
Right. No matter how good we've got it, we are still dissatisfied. And what does that produce for us? It produces a nonstop stream of progress. Of course, it produces a lot of paranoid fantasies, but it does. We goad ourselves into progress, and that's the way we are built, is to be dissatisfied. So when you're dissatisfied with yourself and you're kicking yourself in the ass, or you think that there's no reason you should exist on planet Earth because people don't really want you, those are the things that are going to goad you into action. Those are a social positive. Those are one of your greatest gifts of all things. And just to show you how good things are, I developed this since the last time we talked. Here's how good we've got things now. We have them better than they've ever been in the history of humanity. First of all, if you'd been born in 1850, your life expectancy would have been 36.5 years. If you'd been born in 2000, your life expectancy would have been 78.5 years. Anywhere in the Western world, that's not just it's not just adding an extra 40 years
right
to our lives. It is more than doubling the human lifespan. If you'd been the poorest paid worker in England, in London, in 2000, you would have earned what an entire tenement full of the poorest paid workers earned back in 1850.
Right.
In London. Those were Irish dock workers. You would have earned 7 times what the average dock worker earns. And then there are a whole bunch of things that you can't measure in money, like the cell phone that I'm holding in my hand, like the existence of the internet, like the existence of Google, which are things that are available to many homeless people.
Right.
Because they have cell phones. My friend Derek, the homeless guy who begs in front of the Key Food supermarket, or used to, there's a little comparison here. Once upon a time, there was a guy who was one of the richest men in the world and one of the most powerful. And he had techno-lust, which I can identify with because I've got techno-lust too. I just love technologies. So he put together an event. He designed a building of a kind that no one had ever seen before. And he got the Russians, the Chinese, the South Americans, the North Americans to send their latest technologies to London just so he could see them. It was called the Great Exposition of 1851.
Right.
And then he came down with a stomach problem and died at the age of 42. His name was Prince Albert. His wife's name was Queen Victoria. With all this power, he couldn't keep his life going past the age of 42. My friend Derek, the homeless guy, not only had a bicycle, which would have floored Prince Albert, and a cell phone, which Prince Albert just wouldn't have understood at all. It was beyond science fiction. But if he came down with a stomach problem, he could walk over to the emergency room at the local hospital, only 4 blocks away from where he begged. They'd give him an antibiotic, and in fact, Derek lived to the age of 72, 30 years longer than Prince Albert. Not only that, but the average IQ since the first Stanford-Binet test, IQ test, was administered in 1916, the average IQ has gone up by 35 points.
Right.
In other words, the average dummy on the streets, who book after book has told you have been shallowed and dumbed down by Facebook and the internet and their cell phones, the average kid measures at just below genius level on an IQ test today. And then there's our height. We are, on the average, 4 inches taller than we were in 1900. And if you grew up in Holland, you're 7 inches taller.
Wow.
Than you would have been in 1900. So all of these things are the fruits of a Western system that operates through a balance between capitalism, private industry, government, socialism, and the protest industry, which keeps kicking us in the ass and has been kicking us in the ass ever since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution in approximately 1780.
Well, let me ask you a question that's kind of related to that balancing act. Because one of the big platforms that a lot of people on the Democratic side are going for this time, you see it in various forms. A lot of the candidates seem to have some form of it in their platform. The progressive ones for sure, but even a lot of the moderate and centrist ones. Some form of, all right, the rich need to pay more taxes. Now, for Elizabeth Warren, it's the idea of a 2% tax on holdings over $50 million in assets, which would be annual. Which I forget the exact number of what that would be in terms of revenue for the government, but it's really high, which you could then ostensibly use to pay for a lot of the social programs that you and I were discussing a moment ago. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, your buddy, has said that she wants to see not a tax on holdings, but a tax on income. She wants to raise the progressive tax rate really high, over 10 million, like I think 70%. She wants to tax over $10 million earned. Bernie Sanders wants a tax on Wall Street, not speculation.
Trades.
Yes, that's
Trades.
right. What do you make of these kind of ideas? Do you think that there's some form of this that needs to be enacted? Because to me, it does feel like the balance is a little bit off.
Way off. And I agree with these programs.
Do you think we should institute all of them, one of them? What do we do? If Howard Bloom is president, what kind of tax system changes are you going for?
70% marginal tax rate. Let me explain what that means. First of all, in the 1950s, we had a Republican president. His name was Dwight D. Eisenhower. Right. And the marginal tax rate was approximately 70%. Now, what is a marginal tax rate? The way that I believe it's Ocasio-Cortez is projecting it, it means that on your first $10 million, you get taxed at God knows what, 20%, 25%, 30%, whatever it currently happens to be.
Right.
But any money you make past $10 million is taxed at the rate of 70%.
Yeah, now, a lot of people, even mainstream Republicans, seem to misconstrue it as she wants 70% of all revenue, all people's money. It's like, no. After 10 million, anything that you make beyond that 10 million will be taxed at 70%. Before that, you get taxed at different rates. Your income is taxed at whatever. I don't understand how at this point there's people who still don't understand how a progressive tax system works, but.
Well, especially one of my smartest Republican Trump fan friends. But let's go back to Dwight Eisenhower and the 70% marginal tax rate in the 1950s. What happened to the economy in the 1950s? Did this
Boomed.
tank the economy?
No, it
No,
boomed.
the 1950s were one of the most prosperous periods in American life, with a tremendous amount of social mobility. Did it tank? Did it turn out to have delayed responses that you just couldn't see in the beginning? No, the 1960s were one of the most flourishing, upbeat financial eras in the history of America. So these things will not damage the American economy. In fact, far from it, they seem to have been associated with encouraging and flourishing the American economy. What do you think about these high marginal tax rates?
I'm in favor. I mean, I don't know. I think that, look, I don't know what exactly I'm in favor of, but I know that I'm in favor of wealth being redistributed. And people get scared of that. They think, oh, it's communism or whatever. People don't know what the fuck communism is, and they start throwing it around loosely. But I'm in favor of, I do think that there's way too much money concentrated at the very, very top. And look, I'm not against rich people. I like rich people. I like entrepreneurs. I like the idea that maybe one day I'll be rich. So I don't want to get rid of that. I think it's a great incentive. I think it's a great, it's part of the American dream, the idea of being rich. But, at some point, you don't have to give them, you don't have to, they're already rich. They don't need the red carpet rolled out for them. They don't need every tax loophole possible. They don't need every tax break possible. They don't need a million incentives to do anything. Their incentive is they get to be rich and live in a giant mansion and have servants and live the lifestyle that most people can only fucking dream of. So, yeah, I'm in favor. I mean, $10 million, like, if you're going to fucking tell me that $10 million a year at a lower tax rate than 70% isn't enough for you to live on, then fuck you.
Well,
I think it's fine. I mean, maybe if I was TJ, I'm making $50 million a year, I'd be like, God damn, this 70% marginal tax rate over $10 million is bullshit. But I'm not. I'm not that, and very few people are. So, But no, I think
what's been going on.
There has to be some sort of wealth redistribution. There has to be some sort of money has to start moving. They talked to us in the 80s and Reaganomics about it's going to trickle down. It's going to trickle down. It's like, well, it ain't trickling down. So we're going to have to start pushing it down. All right.
Right. One thing to recognize is that the corporate system is a wealth distribution apparatus.
Right.
That it has especially evolved into that over the last 40 years for CEO pay, which used to be 12 times what an average worker earned in your company.
Now it's like, 100 or something? It's crazy.
About 500. It's about 527 times what the average worker earns.
Let me ask you, on that point, let me ask you this, because this is something I've talked about in the past. Like, what would you say about an idea of, hey, the CEO's not allowed to make more than, 30 times the lowest paid employee or something like that? Or
I think it's terrific.
50 times or whatever number we decide on. But there should be some kind of limit, like, hey, you shouldn't be getting paid 500 times more because you're not that valuable. You know what? I mean, like, the companies switch CEOs all the time. You're not that vital where you need to be getting these huge compensations, especially when we hear about these companies that go belly up and fold and fuck up and need to be bailed out. And then the CEO takes here's my $20 million bonus because I did such a good fucking job. It's like, no, you didn't, you piece of shit.
Right. Well, we're both up against those things. Plus, Jack Welch, who was in the 1980s and 1990s the head of GE, and who turned GE, which is now unfortunately a dying company, but he turned GE into one of the most successful companies in the world. And the phrase he used was shareholder value, which meant there was only one thing you should pay attention to, and that is how much the people who own your stock are earning. No, bozo, the ultimate stakeholders in your company are your customers. If you send away all of your customers, your cash flow stops dead. If your customers like your products, they will give you a continuous cash flow. But the customers were ignored, and the obligation to the customers ignored. So there was an income redistribution in favor of stockholders. And of course, CEOs paid themselves off, not just with outrageous salaries, but with outrageous amounts of stock. So there has been an income redistribution to the rich over the course of the last 40 years, and it's time to rebalance things.
Right.
Economies work on a balance, just the way our economy works on a balance between socialism, capitalism, and the protest industry. There has to be balance in terms of who a company regards as those that it's ultimately accountable to. And those people that it's ultimately accountable to are not just current customers, which it needs to treat well, but future customers offering goods and services that have never been offered before. And there needs to be, in terms of taxation, a special niche for those who create entirely new forms of wealth.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, like the guy who invented the internet.
Yeah, he didn't get rich off of it.
No, he didn't get rich off of it.
He should have.
Working for the government. It was a government project.
So what would it be like? It'd be like an innovator's dividend or bonus or something like that.
Yeah, because for the guys who invented Google, the guy who invented Facebook, the guy who invented Amazon, and if they add new services and those services catch on with the public, well, they do get a bonus. They do
basically,
get
what would you would propose something like, let's say, hey, you invented, a lot of times you don't know what's a revolutionary technology in the moment, but let's say a revolutionary technology happens and it changes the world. We go and say, hey, you or this team or whatever, you guys invented this. We like to encourage innovation. We like to encourage people to create new things that revolutionize our society. So in recognition of what you've done, here's a shit ton here's a big pot of money, basically. Would it work like that, or would there be some
above $10 million, we give you, let's say, a 50% marginal tax rate.
Oh, so give them like a tax break or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one thing, you have to understand something about tax breaks. That's not real money.
Right.
When Amazon was given a $2.9 billion tax break in New York, that wasn't money changing hands. Ocasio-Cortez was totally wrong about that.
Right.
That was enough money to cover the taxes they would have paid in their first year of operation, and then from that point on, they would have been.
But that's money. Well, it's not money. It's not actual money. It's not money changing hands from New York City over to Amazon, but it's money that Amazon, under normal circumstances, without that deal, would have owed New York. Not necessarily. Yeah. So right. I mean.
But then the bonanza past that point,
right.
Plus the bonanza. What I was really looking forward to was having Amazon in this town, because New York is not regarded as a tech capital,
right?
Even though we have a very substantial number of people in the tech community, 600,000. That's a
plus.
Fairly
I mean,
big
you could get your Amazon. Like when I lived in Seattle, and there was an Amazon fulfillment center, very close by. There was a lot of stuff I could get the same day. It's like I ordered online and it was in my door in a couple hours, and it's like, wow,
right.
That's awesome.
And
now if I order something off Amazon, I'm living in Louisiana again. Because it's just like, certain places they just get their, people talk about setting down roots. I feel like the roots aren't from me to this place. The roots are from this place to me. And like, no matter where I go, I get dragged back here somehow.
Just noticed that when you bounced up to Ohio and then bounced back.
Back. As I'm always all over the place, but somehow I always kind of make my way back to Louisiana. But now it's like I order stuff on Amazon, and I love Amazon. I mean, I don't necessarily love all their credo as a company and all that stuff, but in terms of ordering stuff online and getting it, I love it. So I love the service. But now it's like, I can't get anything. It takes at least 2 days to get anything now.
Right. And it takes that too, but they're working.
That's an eternity for me.
Right, and they're working on that. And it used to take, in the days of the Sears Roebuck catalog, it used to take 2 months.
Yeah, well, I don't even know if I could have existed then. But
right, fulfillment rate has gone way up. But the point is that New York has this incredible talent pool, really, really bright people, and really, really bright people want to live here if they can afford it.
Yep.
And so it would have it would have put New York on the map, along with the Google headquarters that's here, as a tech capital. Yeah. And I need that personally, just for the sake of my survival.
Do you think that New York kind of shoots itself in the foot by making it so I don't know if they necessarily make it that expensive to live there, but it is very expensive to live there. So it's like, it's not necessarily the most attractive option for a lot of people to necessarily go to. I mean, it is in terms of like there's a lot going on. But it's like, oh wow, for if I want to live in New York, I can live in a fucking broom closet for $2,500 a month or something.
Right. And that's not an exaggeration.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of the stuff people are paying 25, 3,000, whatever for, and it's like, oh god, that's like my bedroom alone is bigger than that.
Right.
So I just don't even know.
Yeah, it would be nice if rents were. It wouldn't be nice for me because I own my own building and I have three tenants, and that's how I manage to be an intellectual prince or whatever the fuck it is that I am. But so it wouldn't be good for me.
Howard Bloom, landlord.
My tenants are fortunate. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that my tenants are like family to me.
Yeah, awesome.
And I try to take very good care of them, and they seem to know that. So,
yeah, I
but
mean,
one way or the other.
But I mean, like maybe it doesn't have to necessarily hurt landlords and stuff. I mean, it could be something where maybe it could be that expensive in some cases, but maybe if someone's like a really they just graduated and they're like top of their class or something, maybe there could be some kind of, okay, well, because our city wants young, promising professionals to come here, we're going to pay part of your rent or whatever, because we think
New
you're
York
going to
has had that. There's this giant building in the West Village called Westbeth.
Right.
And it was set aside for artists probably about 50 years ago. And if you're an artist and you manage to get into this place, you live at a very, very low rent. And you have this incredible view of the river and New Jersey over on the other side. So we've done some of that. I don't know if it's produced the greatest artists in the world, because when the government has to decide which is a good artist and which is not.
I don't know if the government is necessarily great at figuring out what's good art, but
and they're not, and that's why we need the free market.
Yeah,
so,
for sure. I mean, like you said, it's all a balancing act. And look, when I look at economics, and I'm not going to claim I'm any sort of fucking expert. But I always favor a mixed economy, and I've read your book, Genius of the Beast, a radical revision of capitalism.
Right.
And I saw that you really advocated, like, look, these things, you can't look at it like, oh, it's either capitalism or it's socialism or it's this or it's that. Like, you have to find. It's like a different tool for every job, like some problems are nails, some problems are screws. Sometimes you need the hammer of capitalism. Sometimes you need the screwdriver of socialism, whatever. But anyway, I'm running a little low on time, so I'm going to ask you a final question, and I'm going to make it very open-ended so you can go wherever you want with it. But let's say tomorrow, for one day, Howard Bloom is dictator of America, and he can enact one new law or one new social policy or whatever he wants. What's that going to be?
I would take the Bernie Sanders platform, education for all, Medicare for all, and I would put them in place as quickly as possible.
So do you support Bernie Sanders then, or do you think there's a downside?
No. Unfortunately, the greatest anti-Semites are Jews. Bernie Sanders is Jewish. He's pro-Palestinian. Well, the Palestinian people's an artificial people that was made up in the 1960s.
Right.
And it was made up specifically to allow the Arab nations surrounding Israel to drive the Israelis to the sea and have a mass extermination of Jews. And I'm not in favor of that.
Because you're big into the Zionist and Israel stuff. Right?
Yeah, I'm a Zionist. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we definitely don't have time to get into that right now, but maybe that can be a follow-up. We can talk about Israel and its role in the world and how that kind of stuff works.
Well, that would be neat.
But as far as Bernie Sanders' domestic agenda goes, you're pretty on board with that stuff, though, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think he's got it right. Thank God there's an articulator in the massive politicians in front of us now. And Bernie is a great
Oh, shit. With the Israel stuff, we could have gotten into... what's her name? Ilhan Omar and stuff like that as well.
Oh yes.
But maybe we can have another conversation soon about that kind of stuff.
When I have my laptop in my lap again, we'll reschedule something. Saturday's for you, so we'll try to do another Saturday.
Yeah, maybe so. Just be in touch with me, and we'll figure out something we could do there. And I'm sure people would be interested to hear that conversation. I might have to bring someone else on who's a little bit more knowledgeable than me, because my foreign policy chops are not the greatest in the world. But, we can definitely arrange something on that. And I want to thank you for joining me here today and talking all this politics and all the other weird little tangents we went on. Really miss talking to you. It's great. Let's not wait 4 years till the next conversation.
Yes, I'm in total agreement.
All right. Thanks, Howard. Appreciate you stopping by.